Good evening, everyone. Looks like folks are arriving. I know Director Hogan will not be here tonight. Let's see. It looks like everyone else, or well, not everyone else, but all the other directors are here. So we'll go ahead and get started since it's 5:31 with a roll call. Let's see. Okay. Director Matthews.
Here.
Director Hogan is absent. Director Castellano is here. Director Smith.
Present. Thank you.
Good to see you. Director Madrone. Director Madrone. I see maybe he's on a call or something. Director Wilson.
Here.
Okay. I'll just try. Director Madrone, are you here? Okay. Well, I'll maybe check in with him in a minute, and then we'll just get started for now, and bring the meeting to order, and move on to item number 2, the consent calendar. All matters listed under the consent calendar are considered to be routine by the HWMA board and will be enacted upon by one motion. Unless a specific request for review is made by a board member or member of the public, the consent calendar will not be read. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless pulled for discussion. Would anyone like to pull an item for discussion from the consent calendar? Okay, hearing none, we will not pull any item. Would anyone like to make a motion on?
I'll make a motion to accept the consent calendar.
Thank you, Director Matthews. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Director Smith. And we will go ahead and do a roll call vote on that. Director Matthews.
Yes.
Director Smith.
Yes.
Director Wilson.
Yes.
Director Madrone. And Director Castellano votes yes. So motion passes with Director Hogan absent. And I guess we'll say Director Madrone is absent at this time. Does anyone have the capacity, sorry to pause for just a second, does anyone have the capacity just to text Director Madrone just to maybe let him know the meeting started just in case he got distracted by a call or something? I might have that capacity. So yeah, I don't hear anyone else chiming in. I just know we have one item that we need all of us or everyone who's here. Okay, I don't have his number. Okay, we'll just try. We'll just keep moving. Okay,
I can Facebook message him. I don't know if that will do any good. I can try.
Okay, thanks, Director Matthews. Sorry.
I'm present. This is Steve. Sorry.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Glad you're here, Steve. Okay. With that, we will move on to oral and written communications. This time is provided for people to address the board or to submit written communications concerning matters not on this agenda. Board members may respond to statements, but any request that requires board action will be referred to staff for review. Reasonable time limits may be imposed on both the total amount of time allocated for this item and on the time permitted to each individual speaker. Such time allotment or portion thereof shall not be transferred to other speakers. Are there any members of the public who wish to make comment at this time? Let's see. I do not see any hands raised. Okay. Have we received Director Keller-Heckman, have we received any public comment or written communications?
We are not.
I can, but you sound very robotic. It's threw me off for a second. But I think you said that we have not.
How's that?
Oh, much
Better? Okay.
with your everyday voice.
No, Chair, we have not received any.
Thank you. Okay. And with that, we will close oral and written communications and move on to item number 4. Board to affirm approval of the fiscal year 2022-2023 budget and approve resolution 2023-06 to ratify resolution 2023-01, a resolution of the Humboldt Waste Management Authority for the amendment of integrated waste management fees. And with that, I will turn it over to Eric Keller-Heckman, Interim Executive Director.
Thank you, Chair Castellano. As you guys know, the HWMA Board of Directors approved the fiscal year 2022-2023 budget at their regularly scheduled May meeting. Unfortunately, the required voting supermajority of 5 members was not available at that meeting. Section 8.3 of the HWMA Joint Powers Agreement specifies that 70% of all directors are required to approve specific items, including the annual operating budget. What this would do is this resolution would ratify the board's actions in that May meeting and ensure HWMA's joint power authority requirements are met. So simply, staff recommends to approve Resolution 2023-06 and direct staff to distribute the approved resolution to member agencies, franchise haulers, and other interested parties.
Thank you. And just to be clear, that's, no changes have been made to that document. We're basically just going through and ratifying it because we didn't have enough people before.
That is correct. HWMA staff is currently operating under that fiscal year 2022-23 budget, and there are no changes that have been made since that May meeting.
Perfect. Thank you. Do board members have any other questions? Director Matthews.
I'm sorry, that was me. I had COVID really bad in May, so I'm sorry. So I remember at one of the last presentations that we got, there were some issues with the budget. If I'm understanding correctly, is everything copacetic right now? Eric?
So staff is currently operating under that approved budget in May. Any changes or alterations will be brought to the board at mid-year adjustments.
All right, great. Well, if that's all there is, then I'll move to accept the budget or the amendment.
We have a motion by Director Burns. We still will open it up for public comment, but we can go ahead and have the motion.
Are we still open for board comments?
We sure are.
I'm not sure how to phrase this. It goes along with what Meredith asked. It seems to me that in some other discussions, there was some questions about the accuracy of the figures. And so I don't know if it's probably a moot point at this. When is the mid-year report due?
The mid-year budget is normally done January, February. And so just to be clear, this resolution is only to ratify the board's decision in May. Staff has not brought forward any alterations or suggested changes to this budget. We are simply ratifying the action that this board took in May. Whether the budget needs adjustments in certain divisions or certain areas, that all of that will be addressed at the mid-year budget review.
And we're only missing one board member tonight, so we have five of the 6.
That is correct.
All right, that's all my questions.
Good questions. Thanks, Director Wilson. Let's see. Are there any other board members who have questions on this item? We do have a motion on the floor. Oh, Director Madrone.
Second the motion that's on the floor.
you. And I will, before we take it to a vote, I will just open it up for public comment. Or do any members of the public wish to make comment on this item? Okay, seeing none, we'll close public comment.
And I'm sorry, can you confirm who made the motion initially and who seconded?
Yeah, Director Matthews made the motion and Director Madrone seconded the motion.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Great. And so just bringing it back to comment from directors, I do want to just reiterate, I mean, I know that, at this point, this is kind of a bureaucratic process that we need to go through just to, kind of sort of right our wrongs of having passed the budget without the required number of people. But, from what I was gleaning from Director Matthews and Director Wilson, I just want to say that, I think we are aware that, and eager to kind of get into the budget for that mid-year review. So, and make sure that we're not steering the organization in any way that's, going to lead us toward something that, we should be more concerned about. So thanks for that. And we definitely look forward to that. Any other comments from board members? Okay, we'll call the vote. Let's see, Director Matthews. I think that was a yes. That was sorry. Okay. Director Hogan's absent. Director Castellano votes yes. Director Smith.
Aye.
Director Madrone.
Aye.
And Director Wilson.
Yes.
Great. Motion passes unanimously with Director Hogan absent. Thank you. Okay, and we will move on to item number 5, approve Golder Associates Project Addendum dated July 25th, 2022 for fiscal year 2022 and 2023. And this item is, it looks like we have Tony Heacock here, Director of Environmental Health and Safety.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take the initial overview. So Golder and Associates assists HWMA with professional services related to landfill monitoring and reporting. Simply, this is not on the consent calendar because of one area of note. It was requested by the HWMA board in 2021 that staff develop a request for proposals for these services in the future. Unfortunately, this past year, that direction was not carried out. Staff's recommendation, due to the nature of the services and the reliance on them for compliance activities at the landfill, we recommend approving the presented addendum and directing staff to develop a request for proposal for these services this coming year. We do also have Director Heacock. He's the Environmental Health and Safety Director. He can answer any more in-depth questions about the contract and those services that Golder provides.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members of the board? Okay, seeing none. Let's see, we'll go ahead and open it up to members of the public. Any members of the public wish to make comment on this item? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. Maybe I just have one question. I mean, I've heard that we're getting good service, from Golder Associates. Can you confirm that, Director Heacock? Or Keller Heckman?
Good evening, Mr. Castellano. Thank you. Yes, they are fantastic. They've been a pleasure to work with, and they've been really supportive in all aspects of supporting the landfill's compliance with the water board. So yeah, they've been great to work with.
Thank you. Appreciate that. That was my understanding, but it's always good to hear that when we're affirming or renewing a contract. So thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from members of the board? Okay. Would anyone like to entertain a motion? This is a two-part motion. Just if folks have it in front of them, I'll just read it out loud if that's useful. It was a very big agenda package, so I know that sometimes it was hard to find those documents in there. The first part is approve the project addendum dated July 25th, 2022, in the amount not to exceed $81,763 with Golder Associates, Inc. to perform groundwater monitoring, quarterly landfill gas monitoring, and reporting at the Cummins Road landfill. And the second part, and this is staff's recommendation, of course, authorize the interim executive director to execute the project addendum.
So moved.
Thank you, Director Matthews. Would anyone like to second that motion?
Second.
Thank you, Director Smith. Okay. I think I already asked if anyone had any additional comments, so I'll just go ahead and bring it to a vote. Director Matthews.
Yes.
Director Hogan's absent. Castellano votes yes. Director Smith.
Aye.
Thank you. Director Madrone.
Yes.
Thanks, Director Madrone. And Director Wilson.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, motion passes unanimously with Director Hogan absent. Just appreciating staff for getting all of these, I know, kind of business items out of the way. Director Madrone, is your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Chair. There's a post in the chat from Jennifer Weiss asking if someone can post the ID and password. There's a community member that can only call in, so they need a phone number. Thank you.
So I did send it to her directly. I sent I sent the link. She just got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's got it.
Perfect. Thanks everyone for taking care of that. And thank you, Director Madrone, for noting the chat into the record. Okay, we will move forward to item number 6, which is receive the Humboldt County Edible Food Recovery Study and SB 1383 Compliance Roadmap Plan prepared by Edgar and Associates and take direction as appropriate.
Thank you, Chair. So at a joint study session in September, HWMA board members and the Solid Waste Local Task Force received a presentation on the draft SB 1383 Compliance Plan Roadmap and the Edible Food Recovery Capacity Study. The Compliance Plan Roadmap is what I'll touch on first, and it consisted of 5 tasks. Task 1 and Task 3. Task 1 is the Compliance Roadmap, and Task 3 is the Edible Food Recovery Study. Those 2 tasks were completed. Task 2, the Organics Processing and Collection, and Task 4, procurement activities, were partially completed. And finally, Task 5, the waste management fee structure is currently incomplete. This is due to the reallocating of funds from Task 5 to Task 1 and Task 2 to ensure continued work and completion. So overall, staff has internally reviewed and prepared limited revisions necessary to finalize the document. There was 1 request for changes to the edible food recovery document, specifically to Appendix C by a local task force member. HWMA received these changes after the board packet was finalized for this evening, but recommend including those requested changes in the final document. For the compliance plan, Edgar and Associates submitted final revisions to HWMA on September 21st. These changes, along with staff revisions, include grammatical and spelling corrections and updates to portions of the document originally prepared in February of 2022. Staff would note that there are inherent issues in the document that staff is unable to correct. These include a general misunderstanding of differences and responsibilities between HWMA, the county, member agencies, and participating jurisdictions, a lack of understanding of HWMA's solicitation and procurement processes, a lack of short-term alternatives and potential long-term options, a lack of methodology and assumptions to describe some tonnage projections that were generated. Of note, the importance of securing flow control of organic material prior to assuming financial and infrastructure commitments is not present. Staff would also note that most timelines within the document are no longer valid. HWMA staff would also note that several of these issues outlined above correlate directly to HWMA's poor management and ability to give decisive direction to the consultant throughout the life of this project. The current staff report is filled with statuses of roadmap activities and recommendations for specific items in each document that we will touch on a little later in item 7 tonight. But the overall recommendation right now is to receive both these documents, amend the documents as recommended by HWMA staff and local task force members, and redistribute to local task force and interested parties. I would be more than happy to answer any questions that you have or retouch on anything that I mentioned. And I believe Evan Edgar from Edgar and Associates is in attendance as well to answer any follow-up questions.
Thank you. I guess first I'll open up to board members for questions. I have a couple, but I'm going to hold them so that other folks can ask their questions. Any members of the board have questions on this item?
I do.
Thanks, Director Wilson. Go for it.
So if I understood you correctly, Eric, you listed at least a half a dozen or more outstanding issues. Basically, sound like basically the whole document is in question. And that reason that it's in question is because of HWMA's inability to reconcile the report given to us as presented to us. Is that correct?
I believe probably a better way to say that is a great deal of the document is still valuable and has value. Unfortunately, it lacks some critical pathways, and some of that can absolutely be attributed to HWMA's inability to give decisive direction to our consultant during this project.
I think, I'm trying to be diplomatic how I ask this question and this is in no way intended at you or any current members of our staff. I guess that's one statement that I should make. Is it the intent of the HWMA staff to correct these, and then you said redistribute this actual roadmap to us? Is that what I heard you say?
So HWMA staff is unable to correct some of the issues in the document. What we have done is worked with Edgar and Associates to correct some of the grammatical errors, spelling, timelines, but it would fundamentally alter the document if some of the changes were to be made. If that makes sense.
I guess it makes sense, but it also, does this make sense that for us as a board, I don't have the time that the staff has had to work with this, and they're closer to the issue at hand, and then you're asking us to essentially approve this thing, or is this a read and file, receive and file situation? Are we?
Yeah, it's a receive. It's a receive and amend the documents as recommended by HWMA staff and the local task force.
So what's the consequences of saying, of accepting this, other than is it just informational, or is this I mean, the best I can get out of 1383 at the top of the list is this is a big deal. And the responsibility falls on the jurisdiction, but the jurisdictions of the JPA have said we're asking HWMA to take this on to be the focal point of this process, which funnels back down to the local jurisdictions.
That's correct.
If it fails, then we're inevitably going to fail and be responsible, possibly for some pretty big fines.
So it's important to note that the LTF in July of 2021 requested HWMA to coordinate and circulate this request for proposal. This compliance roadmap and these documents are not a fundamental commitment by either the jurisdictions or the HWMA to follow the compliance plan roadmap. Obviously, in an ideal world, that is what would happen. But this document and how it is presented before the board tonight, whether you vote on it for or against, it is not a binding document, and it has no commitments tailored to that document. If that makes sense.
Again, it does. So I'm trying to say, what by voting for this, what are we committing ourselves to?
The only thing that you're committing is finalizing the document that should have been prepared in May and delivered. So that way we can give that back to the LTF. That's really all that this motion and this staff report are suggesting.
And to present it back to the LTF.
That is correct.
And then from there, where is our next step in this process? Once we've given it back to them, do we still have to take further direction on how we're going to carry it out?
So,
I mean, I have parts of it I'm okay with, but how we're actually going to implement it is that was not covered in September.
Absolutely. And so that is what agenda item number 7 on tonight's agenda is a preliminary path forward for SB 1383 regional organics processing and development. So that will be coming in the number 7 agenda item tonight.
All right. I'll stop asking questions for the time being.
Thanks for your questions, Director Wilson. Director Madrone.
Yeah, just very quick. Tom Matson is trying to join the meeting by phone, but says that the phone number and ID passcode don't work. And I think we'd very much like to have his presence here tonight. We're talking about some really important stuff. And secondly, I'm not sure if we're really ready to vote on something that needs to have a bunch of additions, amendments, and additional material brought forth to really kind of fill in all the holes that Eric mentioned in the document. I agree, it's a great document, a lot of great stuff there, but there's some really important holes that need to be repaired, updated, like the timeline and so many other things. And without those in front of us tonight, I'm not sure that we're really prepared to vote on it per se. But Eric, perhaps you can correct me that it was a huge packet. My sweetheart's been in the hospital for a month, so I apologize. I haven't had a chance to read the entire packet. It's huge. I'm trying my best to assimilate the information here and stuff. But if Eric, could you again? Is the staff recommendation to approve something tonight or to fill in the holes that you mentioned earlier and then bring it back to us for approval at a future date?
So staff recommendation is to simply amend the documents with minor spelling, grammatical changes, and some timeline changes. The whole out of the document is not going to be changed or amended, or at least staff is not recommending that. Obviously, the board has discretion So if that is something that they ask staff to move forward with, then we will look at doing that. But tonight is simply an attempt to amend the document to make sure spelling, grammatical errors, and timelines are appropriate.
Thanks. And I see Nancy Diamond has her hand up. I just want to say, just in case Director Madrone, you can't see who's here, that Tom Matson has joined the meeting. So I know you were concerned that he wasn't able to enter. So I think he's in now. Nancy Diamond.
Yeah, thank you. I want to maybe clarify to my understanding, the board is being asked to simply receive and file, not approve, but just receive and file. Now, to the extent that staff made, the minor typographical revisions, they're just simply asking the board to approve those cleanups, housekeeping cleanups. I think by receiving and filing, and I'm going to ask the interim ED to correct me if I'm wrong, the board would be fulfilling HWMA's obligation under the contract. And I think that is just part of contract management and wrapping up the contract. And perhaps Mr. Keller Heckman can expand on that a little bit.
General Counsel Diamond, that is correct. This really wraps up HWMA's involvement in the current contract and ensuring that this was brought forward to the board and then the final reports given back to the LTF.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. It's looking over the project schedule and some of the documents, as well as staff's notes, of the things that haven't happened. So I realize, we're kind of at this part where we're kind of accepting the work that's been done and being like, okay, this chapter is complete. Now we, move on to another chapter. I'm just curious, I know that Edgar and Associates, there's a bigger scope of work kind of, implicated or, described within the document. And so, by Edgar and Associates, and so I guess I'm kind of curious, like, by accepting this, then, so we've kind of said, like, chapter 1 is finished, then, like, if we want to continue that scope of work, would that come back before the board? Is that kind of what the next, I guess I'm trying to imagine, like, next steps, which I think are sort of implied in other board members' questions too.
Yeah, so the current contract, the funds have been fully expended. So as of right now, there will be no work done going forward without either an extension or an amendment to that contract, which would obviously have to be brought before the board before that action was taken.
Thank you. And then I see that, Evan Edgar is here on the line. And so I'm just kind of curious if you would like to, and I want to, as a, I know you're a professional in the field who's, done a lot of work in this arena. So I just want to recognize that there have been significant changes, at HWMA since you've been working on this. And so that, I don't think that, you've had the same sort of maybe working process as you were anticipating, let's just say. But anyway, I'm just curious if you want to comment or respond to any of the things that have been brought up by board members tonight or in the staff report.
Thank you, Chair and board members. It's been a unique pleasure working and serving Humboldt County. And the whole goal was compliance was number 1. And we did that along the way. Number 2 is keep organics in county. And there's a roadmap to get there. And 3, make it cost effective. So writing the roadmap, we actually were complying as we went, mostly because you got a 2-year late start. Most other counties and cities throughout California started this 2 years ago. So we entered it with a crisis management mode when I was actually implementing and meeting deadlines as I was writing the document. Thus, it was called a living document. We had deadlines on February 1st, March 1st, April 1. So it was definitely a work in progress. And it's something that I was placed in an awkward position, I admit it, but I've been through this for 30 years. So I'm proud of the word roadmap. It has vision and hope to get where you need to be. It's valid and relevant up to June 2022. I tried many times to bring this to the board in June and July, and I was told not to. So it was a very relevant document and very much in compliance up to June 2022. It was delayed by the previous executive director. The contract is correct. There's an option to go up to a 3-year contract here as designed in RFP. And I have asked for back in June for additional scope and budget because I've been out of budget since June because we were doing a lot of compliance activity that was outside the scope as we were going. Thus, task number 5 was reallocated $11,500 from task 5 on management fee because we don't have that information yet on what the other compost facilities would charge to export the commercial organics out of the county for a short-term period. So that was reallocated as we were complying with all the cities every step of the way with getting ordinances, getting grant funding, getting everything in order. So the additional scope I did ask for back in June that was put on hold was if they need any help permitting the Hawthorne Street transfer station. And I put that out there. If they wanted me doing any VMT greenhouse gas analysis for transferring organics, because transfer organics is going to Dry Creek now, and the greenhouse gas math is that put an extra truck on a road and hauling organics down south is a greenhouse gas winner by 10 to 1 because we're offsetting methane at a landfill. And by transporting it, it's a winner. But those questions popped up along the way. So that was additional scope. And any else you wanted on edible food. So I've been asking for a contract amendment since June, since I've been working out a budget pro bono since then. But that was never brought to the board. And I tried many times to bring that up, and that's where we're at today. It appears like staff wants to move in a new direction under item number 7, and that will take a while to actually start a new regional compost facility. I mentioned that in my roadmap. It takes 3 to 5 years if you're lucky. And, I've been up and down the state. It took 31 years in Yolo County, 12 years in Ventura County. I'm down in Ventura County now because we got Limonera permits up, and I went through Tulare County with the EIR. So I'm on the road a lot, and it does take a time, but go forth with item number 7. It's needed, but do not shelf the roadmap. There's a lot of good things on the roadmap with regards to transferring some organics out of county for the short term, partnering with agriculture in county for carbon farming, taking your commercial organics to the dairy digester that will be open in first quarter 2024. So there's a lot of good features, and that roadmap should continue, but at the same time, in parallel, you got item number 7. So that is a great process. I'm glad to see that on the map, and that's a worthwhile discussion. The goal I had when prepared the roadmap was compliance number 1 to avoid penalties and fines, and we've done that. We had everything along the way. So I do love Humboldt County. I made it my home up there, and I want to create a home for your organics. But as of today, I withdraw my request for additional budget. I'm not asking for any more scope of work. I believe that the county can go forth with item number 7 with a new team of consultants to move forward with. But so go forth, but I'll be around. I'm not leaving anywhere. I'll probably be in a county implementing this plan because I've been implementing the plan every step of the way since I got hired. I will continue to implement the roadmap. So thank you for letting me serve Humboldt County. A lot of good grant dollars came in, a lot of good hopes and dreams. A lot of past work from 2012 should be resurrected to take slurry to a wastewater digester, and everything you guys did back in 2012 was a good plan in order to have anaerobic digestion at wastewater, but that didn't happen. So I believe that we started late. I finished early. The contract is receive and file. My contract's done, and I'll be around on the sidelines cheering you guys on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Evan Edgar. Appreciated you, over the last, almost a couple of years now. So,
and since January, it's only been 8-9 months, but 10 months, but it seems like a couple of years because we did a lot of a short time period.
Yes, you're right. I'm sorry about that. That's been a lot.
Seems like forever, but it's not.
Wow. Okay. Sorry. I guess, yeah. My fault. Are there any other questions by members of the board? Okay. I'm going to open it up for public comment. Any members of the public wish to make comment at this time? Well, okay, I will close public comment and bring it back to the board. Director Madrone.
Thank you, Chair Castellano. So it was mentioned when Eric gave his summary that the timeline needs update in the plan. Do we have that yet? Do we have something to look at? Or is that going to come back, Eric, for our review? And in terms of the timeline, some of the things, again, I'm one of the newer board members that joined this year. As I understood it, some of the timeline issues had to do with trucks were simply not available because of the supply chain issues and other things. But I'm just curious, what sort of timeline changes are we looking at? Is there going to be a document coming to us, or how do we review that?
So some of the timeline changes are directly related to our inability to relocate the Eureka Recycling Center currently. That also includes HWMA being unable to secure funding to satisfy the necessary facility retrofits at the current Eureka Recycling Center to ensure that that would be an acceptable place to take organics processing. None of these, I'll remind the board, none of these activities were included in the fiscal year 2022-23 budget. So none of these items were budgeted at that time. They cannot be used. We cannot use budget funding for that. So alternative methods of funding would need to continue to be gotten. One of the issues is Director Madrone, like you said, the trucks. The original timeline was January 2023. Franchise haulers could receive their trucks. That date has been pushed out to 2024, with implementation not being fully implemented for curbside pickup until January of 2025. At our last meeting, we also spoke about the issues at West Green Landscaping and how their operations have changed. That would also directly impact this project and the timeline. So unfortunately, there is a lot of pieces that negatively impact this timeline. And right now, staff does not have a recommendation or an ability to bring an adjusted or a redone timeline before the board at this time.
Okay, well, I appreciate that response, Eric. I'm assuming that without that timeline, and because of all the various delays and the fact that you said we're going to have to identify other funding because it's not in our budget for 22-23, I suspect that puts us in a position where we're going to fall out of compliance here as a county, as member agencies, as HWMA. And we may have been working really diligently on this plan and other things, but without those other pieces, am I wrong in thinking that means we're going to fall out of compliance here?
That's not something that I could comment on. That will be up to CalRecycle and each individual jurisdiction's dealings with them. What I will say is that jurisdictions are going to be required to comply in 2023. Whether we can do something about that compliance remains to be seen. Staff I do not have enough information to make that call.
Understood. Yeah, no, I just, as a board member, I'm sitting here really struggling, frankly, with all of this and trying to figure out, so what do we do? How do we move forward? I mean, just approving the plan tonight that can be useful because there's a lot of great stuff in there, but it sounds to me like we have really big issues that we really, as a board, have responsibility to figure out, such as developing a financing plan for the processing facility. Well, first off, it's coming up with some money in a budget to even have staff work on all these things, right? That's number one, because as you said, we don't even have that budget right now. So that's a huge task to figure out. And then we need a financing plan for the processing facility. We need to adjust the timeline in our plan to meet the reality of supply chain issues and all the other things that you brought up, Eric, in terms of, moving the facility. We don't have another place to put it. We're going to need to develop an RFP for moving the product. And we need to, consider real facts and timelines on the dairy digesters in the Ferndale Bottoms, or in the long term, some sort of an in-county facility whereby we can take the fish waste, because now Nordic looks to be moving forward. We've talked about this as a board before. Is how can we do this in county? Obviously, we're not going to be prepared to do that for, I think, Edgar said, that could be a 3 to 5 year timeline minimum to get some of these things in place. So I'm feeling a massive burden here as a board member. I'm not sure how you all feeling, but I'm seeing that, wow, we've got a lot of stuff to deal with here. So I guess I'll just sit back and listen to others, bring forth ideas, suggestions. I definitely want to be part of the solution on all that. But boy, it seems like there's a lot to work with or to deal with. Thank you.
And Director Madrone, I would note as well, while all of those are issues that need to be addressed, and I keep harping on item number 7 because we're going to go over some of these issues and some of the pathways. One of the biggest issues in staff's current opinion is the lack of flow control or committed tonnage for this material. So this would be a very large outlay of fiscal costs for a project that does not have guaranteed or committed tonnage to it. So that is a large issue in staff's eyes as well.
Well, thank you. Through the chair, if I might just follow up.
Sure.
Thank you, Leslie. Yeah, the flow control was the other one on my list to talk about. The county has committed its flow control, as I understand it, to Humboldt Waste Management Authority, but the other member agencies, partners have not. So that's another one of those really big issues sitting there, isn't that? Because without that, what do you got? How do you move forward with everything else if you don't have commitments for flow control, right? That's sort of a central issue. Thanks for bringing that up, Eric. That's all I have.
Thanks, Director Madrone. Director Wilson.
Several of my questions have been answered by Eric and through Mr. Madrone, but the one question I have is how does this relocating we shut down the recycling center for Eureka, and now the next target was to recreate a recycling center somewhere else. How does that really impact 1383 process? It's like they're two different apples and oranges here. Are we tying the cost of the 1383 to the fact that we have to relocate the recycling center?
No, Director Wilson, you are correct. Unfortunately, for several months running, these two issues have kind of been coupled at the hip. And that's simply because the new proposed activities were going to take place in the Eureka Recycling Center. But we need to secure funding either way. But moving the Eureka Recycling Center has not precluded us from securing that funding, and those costs associated with moving the Eureka Recycling Center or relocating it would not impact the operations regarding organics processing.
So, and that was my opinion in this as I read through this or listened to this. So the other thing is we've shut down the recycling center, and we have a big facility that's available for the the processing of the organics. It's just that we haven't got the funding to totally retrofit that as well as operate it.
That is correct. There is no identified funding source for some of the facility retrofits and equipment and additional staff that would need to be used in that facility. And then also staff would remind the board that we do not have flow control over source separated material. So HWMA only retains flow control over solid waste. That means that all of the money used for facility retrofits, equipment, staff would be based on no committed tonnage to those activities.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Wilson. I have a few comments to this. I don't want to. Director Matthews, did you have anything you wanted to? Okay, feel free to jump in later. I just want to say, I'm as my fellow board members are, and I think we all are, kind of rightfully concerned, both about our responsibility and just sort of a certain, wavering direction that we've had for the last, few months or so. And I realize that, our staff now, this is, you kind of inherited this, here we are. And I know that there are some things in the roadmap that maybe had some challenges. And I just want to acknowledge that we have had, though we don't have flow control agreements on the books for everyone, we've had, in some ways, like a really dynamic local task force that has really stayed with us and stayed active through all of this. And so, and in a lot of ways, from my understanding, been collaborating more than ever before, or, than maybe in a long time. And though that's not the same as sort of a signed and written agreement, I do think that does speak to a commitment to, working together for this cause. And I realize that's, staff is different than this coming before each of our, respective councils and boards. And I know that that's another step, but, I think that we can take that. And again, that's sort of, I know, like the next agenda item as well. But what I want to speak to now is I do think that there are still some opportunities in continuing to move forward with the plan, with the kind of roadmap. I know that there's issues with trucks, but I know that, for instance, in Eureka, there's already, curbside pickup of green waste happening. And so there's, some ways in which, and of course I have some bias towards Eureka, right? But, there are some ways that there could be the beginnings of moving forward with this, and I think keep us on the roadmap as well. So that's something, just as we're, and I know right now we're just receiving this report basically, but this is, I think, the opportunity to speak to, I don't want to just receive it and kind of close it and never look at it again. Like I still think that there are some actual good guidelines and recommendations in there because, and again, we'll get to this, but, like some of the other long-term movements are much longer term as other board members have discussed. And so I do think that there's some things that we should do between now and then. And maybe it's not exactly what's in the roadmap, but I do think the roadmap has some good ideas and suggestions and directions for those. And so I just want to encourage us to keep it alive in the receiving of it and find out maybe like how, like if we don't have the funding, for some of these things, like, is there funding to make maybe a smaller baby step toward, to keep on the road plan or the roadmap so that we stay in compliance. That's just my thoughts.
So, Chair Castellano, first I'll touch on the LTF portion. And I would say that not only member agency staff, but all jurisdictional staff in Humboldt County that is part of the LTF have had a desire to work regionally. They've all done great work. They've expressed their willingness and ability to work with HWMA. But as you noted, staff is not a jurisdictional board, city council. We really need those type of things to weigh in on regional compliance. But I will say the LTF and all of its members have been full steam ahead working regionally. I've worked for the authority for 15 years, and I don't think there's a single item that every jurisdiction in the county has worked together on. So the fact that this is the first one really speaks volumes to how much those entities want to work regionally.
Thank you. That's warming, warming to hear. And with that, though, again, just, though staff is not council, I do feel like it might, if I was, if I was a staff member, and had been working on this, I guess, I feel like it may be a little bit of I want to be a good partner I'm trying to speak, it's like weird things to put words to, but, I want HWMA to also move forward in good faith, I guess we've been asking a lot of our, staff people, City of Eureka staff people. And I feel like if we don't keep some movement forward, it also, may compromise, when HWMA does go to member agencies and ask them to kind of partner, if we don't have a sense of really moving forward, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and HWMA is not suggesting or recommending that we abandon the roadmap or all previous work from jurisdictions that have been done. That is not the intent of this report or any of my staff report or comments. There is good work that has been done by consultants and jurisdictional staff alike. So it is not something to just abandon and say we're going to start over.
Thank you. And I didn't ask, Director Smith, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I don't think so. I'm anxious to hear more about item 7, which is pending all evening, which, if it doesn't give us full answers, I'm hoping, since we're talking about roadmaps all evening, and it seems to me that we're reasonably lost on our map, we might get some directions from some of the exchanges on question 7. I hope so.
Thanks. And maybe that's an encouragement to finish, to wrap up this section of the agenda. And well taken. And so, for this item, would anyone like to make a motion? I think we could just keep it as to receive, is the main motion on the agenda, receive Humboldt County Edible Food Recovery Study and SB 1383 Compliance Roadmap prepared by Edgar and Associates. There's, unless we want to offer any other specifics in the motion.
I'm comfortable with that. I'll move. So.
Thank you, Director Matthews. Would anyone like to make a second?
Sure. Second.
Seconded by Director Smith. Thank you. Let's see. Do any other board members wish to comment before I bring it to a vote? Okay.
Yes. Could we read the motion back to us before we vote? We there?
Yes, yes. Sorry, Director Wilson. Director Matthews, do you want to read it or do you want me to read?
I have it on the agenda. I'll have to scroll down to find the actual, what page is it on?
So what I have down in my notes here is that the motion is to receive the amended compliance roadmap plan.
I
Is
have
that correct?
that the board approve minor revisions to the final draft Humboldt County edible food recovery capacity study and distribute the approved document to local jurisdictions for implementation. Yes. Is that?
Yeah.
Yep.
Minus minutes to the timeline. Yep.
Yes.
All right. So the motion is to approve the revisions to the document and distribute it.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Sorry, this was a long one.
No problem. And Director Smith, are you okay with that motion?
Yes.
Okay. We'll bring it to a vote. Thank you for that clarification, Director Wilson. Director Matthews?
Yes.
Director Hogan's absent. Director Castellano, yes. Director Smith?
Aye.
Director Madrone?
Yes.
And Director Wilson?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously with Director Hogan absent. Thank you. Okay, and just again, before we move on, thank you to Evan, Edgar, and Associates for really preparing this very thorough document for us. And we will move on to item number 7, which is consider a multi-step process for SB 1383, organics processing, regionalization, and development. And I will hand that back over to you, Interim Director Eric Keller-Heckman.
Thank you, Chair. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay. Alrighty. So the purpose of this presentation is so that the board may review, discuss, and provide direction to consider HWMA leading regionalized organics processing efforts and define a revised pathway to secure flow control of organic materials and possible development of organics processing services and infrastructure. Reassess existing directions for the closure and relocation of the Eureka Recycling Center and repurposing the Eureka Recycling for organics processing. Consider holding a joint meeting with Humboldt County Solid Waste Local Task Force members to review and discuss organics regionalization pathway and provide direction as appropriate. There are 4 critical questions that must be asked and acted on to proceed with a regionalized approach. Local task force members and jurisdiction staff have expressed interest over the past year in HWMA leading organics processing activities. However, it is the responsibility of the governing boards to decide whether they support entering into regional efforts and potential agreements. Regionalization may be accomplished in several ways. HWMA needs confirmation that these governing bodies support HWMA to be the regional coordinator for the organics activities. Do the HWMA board members support the agency to assume leadership for the coordination and processing of organics? And do they support the agency's necessary expansion of staffing, resources, and the financial responsibility that comes along with that? And finally, not every jurisdiction in Humboldt County is a member of HWMA. Determining how and if HWMA provides regional services to non-member entities is critical. HWMA members agree through the HWMA Joint Powers Agreement to commit flow control of solid waste and direct solid waste to HWMA. This is demonstrated by an ordinance, amendment, or adoption, and a dedication to HWMA through franchise contracts. Flow control allows HWMA to leverage material tonnage to secure competitive pricing for transportation and other services and spread capital costs over a greater tonnage volume for the life of the project. As noted, the current JPA only secures control of solid wastes, not source separated materials such as recyclables, green waste, organics, or other materials. There are 3 general mechanisms to secure flow control. Amend the current JPA, enter into memorandums of agreement, or enter into a traditional agreement. There are pros and cons to each of these mechanisms. Memorandum of agreement. This is a formal understanding between parties to work on a project for a defined period of time. These need to be crafted to ensure all related approvals, authorizations for material, potential finance, and contractual obligations are included. MOAs can pose difficulties when a governing body decides to redirect material, leaving HWMA and remaining participants potentially responsible for the remaining financial obligation. It should be noted HWMA has used MOAs in the past with participating agencies. And in both of these cases, certain participating agencies have directed recyclables to other processors anyway. The next mechanism is a traditional agreement. Like an MOA, they need to ensure all related approvals and authorizations are outlined. Agreements offer legal mechanisms in the event of breach or default. However, a risk remains to participating members in the event of early termination by other parties to the agreement. The impact is dependent on the size of the entity and its share of protected tonnages. Finally, the Joint Powers Agreement. The JPA provides existing approved powers to secure financing, acquire or lease property, establish rates, secure flow control, enter into contracts, perform infrastructure development, as well as addressing critical matters such as member withdrawal provisions and asset distribution in the event of dissolution. JPA amendments and additional membership requires HMA board recommendations and circulating the revised JPA to all members before approval. A process outline provides a high-level understanding and transparency for the public, local entity representatives, and the HWMA board who may change over time. An outline enables continuity and understanding as specific actions are requested to meet projected timelines. This slide will outline the general process to implement a project. Note that the outline provides elements or steps in unique boxes, but in reality, there's often considerable overlap of these activities. The initial step is to define the project, including a projected timeline and board approval. Regionalization follows, with jurisdictions and HWMA determining regional effort and formalized commitments. Next, studies relating to organic tonnage estimates and other studies necessary to the scope of the project are conducted. After that, securing funding and a preliminary rate analysis would be done, along with identifying and securing sites or necessary infrastructure upgrades. At this time, securing necessary permits and completing environmental reviews while holding potential necessary hearings. Finally, solicitation of service, award contracts, and complete infrastructure upgrades. The following is a review of existing directives and actions taken by the board to date. In February, the board received a conceptual proposal to repurpose the Eureka Recycling Center and formed a board member subcommittee. At the May meeting, the board received a timeline and projected costs to close and relocate the Eureka Recycling Center and repurpose the facility for organics processing. In June, the board authorized the executive director to investigate potential properties for the recycling center relocation. At the regular July meeting, the board discussed the pros and cons of relocating the recycling center as opposed to finding a new site for organics processing. The board requested a special meeting to be held for further discussion. At that special meeting held in July, the board was informed no funding was available for the purchase of property or necessary infrastructure improvements. At that time, the board approved closure of the Eureka Recycling Center effective August 1st. In September, a joint special study session was held with local task force where presentations were provided along with the Edible Food Recovery Plan and SB 1383 compliance roadmap. And finally, brings us to today. The board formally received those two plans this evening. With the current roadmap lacking, short-term alternatives, long-term options, combined with an unrealistic implementation timeline that lacks vetted project proposals or flow control commitments, staff feels the HWMA board and local task force members acted on limited information to demonstrate actions to comply SB 1383. HWMA at this time does not have the necessary funding for relocation or facility improvements and is yet to outline potential impacts these activities would have to the waste management fee. Additionally, in July, HWMA was informed of significant changes to green waste processing at the West Green facility. These activities could greatly impact the conceptual project that we have today. Additionally, closure of the Eureka Recycling Center has resulted in residents traveling to McKinleyville or Fortuna to deliver and pay for recyclable materials and electronic waste previously accepted at the Eureka Recycling Center. This closure was presented as temporary with planned reopening in early 2023. Unfortunately, that timeline is no longer accurate. And at this time, we have no projected date for reopening. Staff recommends the following actions. Express interest in leading regionalization and secure flow control through the existing joint powers agreement. Request the governing body of each jurisdiction submit a letter of interest that HWMA act in a regional capacity for purposes of organic processing, and member agencies be willing to support an amendment to HWMA's JPA to secure control of source separated materials, and non-member agencies express willing and initiate steps to join HWMA, and then provide direction to staff to draft JPA amendment language and return to the board for review and approval. Additionally, that the board reassess previous direction given to staff regarding the closure and relocation of the Eureka Recycling Center and repurposing to a processing facility, including potentially reopening the Eureka Recycling Center. We also ask that you schedule a joint meeting with local task force to discuss the development of a preferred project, commitment levels, funding, and timelines in relation to the organics processing. And as always, other direction as the board feels appropriate. And I would be more than happy to answer any questions that I'm sure the board has.
Thank you. Okay. Any questions from members of the board?
I feel like that was so much. I kind of don't even know where to start. So I'm just going to wait and see if someone else asks a question that answers some of the questions that I have.
I'll start off with just a really basic question. Maybe that'll kind of get the ball rolling. Because kind of going back to, taking notes as you're doing, some of the different ways of establishing flow control. I know some of them take longer, would likely take longer than other ways of establishing flow control. And some, like doing one way may not exclude doing another way. Can you talk about, just to get us started, in terms of comparing the time it might take to enter into memorandums of agreement versus the time it might take to amend the current JPA and have other new members join the JPA?
For that information, I would default to legal counsel Diamond if she is available.
I am. Thank you. I honestly don't think it will take any different amount of time. Any agreement that is reached between the parties, whether it's in the form of an MOA, a memorandum of understanding, or a memorandum of agreement, or an outright agreement, would have to be negotiated, approved by the member agencies, and revisions would have to come back for new approval and revision, and then approved, if there are any, by the participating agencies. And then it also has to be approved by the board along the way. So that's a several meeting process. Amending the JPA, I would come first to this board to here's what I propose, but there's a lot of room for discretion for the board to provide direction of what it would like to see in an amendment, and then we would draft the amendment and it would come back, and then the board would approve that. It would go to the member agencies to approve, and then at that point it's approved. You know, the board could ratify it if it chooses to, but once, you know, essentially once we have a majority of the member agencies that have agreed to it, we have the amendment. Now at the board level, we have to have the supermajority, the same supermajority that was required to approve the budget. So there would have to be at least 5 directors voting in favor of the amendment. So that process is I think a 2-meeting process before the board, and then it goes to the member agencies for however long that takes, or the prospective member agencies, because one idea would be even to expand membership, right? But in any event, whatever that timeline takes, hopefully it could be turned around very quickly, because there could be simultaneous conversations with staff as the amendment document is being developed. And certainly at this board's meetings, the member agencies and prospective agencies could be participating. Does that help a little bit? Okay. Was it maybe too much? Sorry.
No. I mean, it's all a lot, so that it is what it is. Director Smith, and then Director Madrone, you'll be next.
So, my feeling about our 3 alternatives here would read in a kind of simplified way that the MOA is, for our purposes, really inadequate. That's not sufficient basis for the kind of commitment that each WMA is going to be asked to put forward. The JPA, in the way that Nancy has proposed, seems to me, from what little I know about the other agencies, that's going to be very difficult to attain with any speed. And goodness gracious, we're so far behind that one on that basis. So my suggestion comes down to a kind of simple-minded, let's go for the middle and settle for an agreement and move on to the more difficult JPA agreement later. The idea being that hopefully the other agencies can agree to something that doesn't give such total control so rapidly to HWMA. The problem is that I really don't know the inside politics of all of this, and I suspect that there's a lot of reluctance about giving up power. I may be mistaken, but that's usually the thing that jams all the wheels. So that's why I'm sort of proposing that we settle for less than the ideal to start with. And I'll hope the JPA will come along later. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Smith. Director Madrone.
Yeah. Oh boy. Lots to consider. You know, I appreciate that Eric has up on the shared screen the first item. Could you quickly show the next slide after that, Eric? I think there was 2 or 3 slides you had. That's A with steps under number A. What were the next ones? There's B and C. So is that pretty much A, B, and C? And D? Other directions as appropriate? Like open the window and start screaming. Open the window and start screaming. Is that okay? You know, okay, go back to the first one. I think if we just take these each one at a time and maybe do a straw poll to see if we've got agreement on the various pieces, might be a way that we could achieve working our way through all of this. I totally appreciate what Director Smith was just saying about potential reluctance on the part of partners or member agencies. But guess what? If we're not all working together on all this, we're all going to be paying fines and fees and everything else. So, I mean, really, is there another option? I mean, it seems to me that having fines, fees, and not being a regional cooperative entity will be a nightmare for everybody with ongoing problems. So I just don't see that as a realistic option. But hey, here we are at this point, and only the county has agreed to flow control. So I'm not sure what the history is behind all of that in the background. But I would say that as far as A, I would absolutely like to express interest in leading a regionalization and secure flow control through our existing JPA. And I think it's been laid out there nicely, 4 different steps on how to do that. I feel very comfortable with that. So maybe before we go to the next one, Chair, would you like to poll the group and see if we have agreement on A? Just a straw kind of an approach. Just a thought.
Just maybe slip just a little bit, Director Madrone, because I want to make sure that I appreciate that as a tactic for kind of going through this, but I feel like we're not quite there yet. And just in terms of process, I want to make sure everyone has their questions answered and also let members of the public speak as well. So but I think that's a great idea for kind of tackling this, because there's a lot of parts.
Okay, then I'll go ahead and finish if I might, Madam Chair.
Please, please.
So Eric, could you pull up B, C, and D, please? And on B, given that we don't have funding to do any of those other things at all, which was concern 3 months ago when we were trying to make this decision, and I brought it up a lot, so did others, let's get the recycling center back open until we have some sort of a firm option to do something differently. So I would say I'm absolutely in support of B and getting it back open. And yeah, we have to try and keep working on relocation, all these other things, but we don't have a budget to support staff to do that work yet. So let's open back up while we can. And I've gotten some feedback from the community that the hours of 8 to 4 do not work well at all for people that work full time. Some suggested make it 9 to 5, although that's still working hours. So I'm not sure how to resolve that. And I don't mean to add additional confusion here. And then C, yeah, I absolutely would support that as well. So those would be my comments on what's before us. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Madrone. I'm hoping we can maybe keep it more to questions right now and then get back to comments after the public comment period. I know I'm kind of a weird stickler for that process. Director Matthews, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I mean, going through this, I do think that B and C are kind of gimmies. I definitely. So if you want to, can we go back a slide? And again, I'm new-ish too, but as far as the JPA agreement, like what? I don't know. Maybe Nancy, could you explain to me like the process of updating it and what it looks like to re-invite, I guess, Fortuna and Trinidad to join, and I guess let's start with that.
Sure. So we had, let's see, at the last study session. I think we had Fortuna indicate a strong, we want to do this regionally, but we don't know if that means whether they want to rejoin the HWMA. And so I think that is why the first step here under the bullet number 1 to request that the governing boards submit a letter of interest is really important. And so for Trinidad and Fortuna, that letter of interest would indicate whether they are committed to joining HWMA in order to be able to participate in the SB 1383 program. So that is, I think, key, because if we get that, then I do believe that we can continue to act in good faith, that everybody is really working together, all the member agency and the prospective agency boards, city councils, are each very excited. Now, I need to just digress a little bit, because flow control does have 2 components to it. At the jurisdictional level, which is something HWMA has no control over, flow control means actually making mandatory the collection of organics through some process and acquiring jurisdiction over the organic materials at the point at which it's placed into the collection receptacle. And so we need each of the jurisdictions to acquire that control through their own ordinances and their own franchise agreements. And every jurisdiction has a different ordinance and a different franchise agreement. And so it's impossible for this board to know exactly how that's going to work. But I understand, although I haven't read it, I understand this is maybe part of what the county has done, and I'm not 100% certain, but I gather that the county has adopted the ordinance. Okay, so that was a slight digression under number 1 that does, though, mean that the governing agencies need to be, very actively involved in this by more than just submitting a letter saying that this is what we want to do. And so then in terms of solidifying flow control for HWMA purposes, so HWMA can now finance and act accordingly with security that it has participation, then we know that the member agencies will be willing to support the amendment. And that really is number 2, so that we then we can start working, with, again, through the LTF, we can start working on the language of an amendment. We could then bring it to the board to approve. We can also go to the board first for the board to provide direction on the scope, or we could do that simultaneously. I'm kind of going to defer to Eric on that one. And so then we have the document, we have the HWMA board that has approved it. And now we have a document that is, it's binding. The parties are all now committed, and they are actually now represented on the board. And so they are now voting members. And so we now have connection with all of the different jurisdictions over those who have not previously participated. And we also have, for those who are already members, we also have now the board through, and we have the representative designees through the board now actively involved in the actual specific actions that HWMA will be taken. And that's through the board approval of the amendment. So then the amendment goes back to the agencies for approval at that level. And hopefully at that point, it won't be anything new, that each of the member agencies and prospective agencies have already had time, either through the board, the HWMA board, or through the LTF, had time to ask their questions and have their concerns addressed. And if revisions need to be made, from their perspective, hopefully those are already made. And so then the jurisdictional governing boards can, with relative ease and simplicity, go forward to approve the amendment. So that is that process. And I hope I didn't get too far into unrelated issues or the weeds.
No, all that was good. Thanks.
Thank you. I have a question about, I think it's item, if you flip the slides, Eric, number B. Yep, letter B. So I'm looking at the project schedule from the road, the roadmap that we talked about in the previous item. And I know that, it was, technically scheduled to already be starting, but, we were talking before about, doing, collecting materials and then shipping them to an out-of-county compost facility. And so by contemplating, or, if we were to pass item B here, if we were to go forward with this, we'd be basically just taking that out of the mix and just saying, we're not doing that. We're going to keep recycling and we're going to go, and then we're just going to focus only on, like an actual in-county permitted facility, or would we just be further delaying the collection and transfer?
No, the B recommendation is simply to examine reopening the recycling center, basically because we have no funding to do the necessary revisions to the facility for organics or to move the recycling center. So as of right now, that facility is just remaining empty without any activity or facility retrofits. And we have not relocated and reopened the recycling center, and we do not have a timeline to do that. This recommendation is not making any assumptions based on future activities at the site.
Do we have the staff to reopen the recycling center right now? I mean, we could open it and it could be staffed.
That is correct. Yeah, we retained all staff and then had them cross-train in different divisions of the authority.
All right.
And so I guess maybe just my follow-up question is, like, what would happen to the SB 1383 collection program, and the collecting materials and moving it to an out-of-county compost facility plan?
I believe this process is the first step in figuring out exactly what the authority and Humboldt County jurisdictions are going to do. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
You have thoughts about it, but it makes sense. Okay. Any other? Director Wilson?
A couple of things. On A, that just seems like a long process. I believe we need to get probably a letter of support or a letter of interest from all of the agencies. Seems pretty, that doesn't seem like a hard thing to pull off. As far as modifying the JPA, I think that's going to turn into a long time. You go from here back to the local agency, back to here. I just don't see that being a quick process, but at least get a commitment in writing from all of the agencies or whoever wants to participate to get rid of this stuff, unless they have a better idea. In my research, over all of the cities that are doing this, every city is doing it themselves. I wasn't able to find any regional ones. And if somebody else knows about it, they can correct me. But that was doing it on like we're talking about doing it with 7 agencies all pushed into one location. So I really support number 1 of A for right now as a short-term movement. When you go to B, as Eric has mentioned, we don't really have, opening the recycling center again. We're not able to have any process of how to sort this. The question I've had through this whole the process is how are we going to collect and separate and even be able to commit tonnage? How are we going to get this from our city? The trucks aren't going to be available till that are talked about, and I'm not even sure what's mentioned in what those trucks are going to do, but they're not going to be around till 2024 or probably later. In as reality turns into what the time frame is going to be. So I don't know how we would collect this organic waste. The best I've heard was, or the only thing that I've heard is that we would put it in a bag and we would throw it in with our green waste. Other jurisdictions they put the green waste and the organics together, which included paper from a hamburger was considered an organic waste, and then that was sent to someplace and it was separated and dealt with from there. So I don't know how we're going to collect the stuff in the first place, how we can commit to what we're going to give somebody. And if in the short term, I guess if you open the recycling center, because we're not going to do nothing for at least another year because of the trucks. So you've got a time frame to go back to letting people recycle their stuff. Item C, definitely schedule a meeting with the Humboldt waste, the local task force. That needs to happen so that this task force, city managers, which makes up a big part of the task force, can get involved in this. So there's not a mystery of me going back to my council at the next meeting and saying, this is just a ball of a mess. It's just it's on a downhill slope looking to get bigger. So I think that would be an important thing to have a joint meeting so the city managers can go back and draft something to present to the council, and the councils need to take that on and agendize it and discuss what they're going to do, because it's as Director Madrone said, we're going to fall out of compliance unless Cal Recycle has become a really benevolent group, and we're going to fall out of compliance and we're going to start getting fined. And so the clock's ticking. And those are my comments.
Thanks, Director Wilson. And just, I guess, just a question related to that. And I know, Eric, you kind of spoke to this earlier, like you can't necessarily predict, like what Cal Recycles is going to do. But have there been any conversations with Cal Recycles, in terms of how we can stay being in compliance through these suggested processes?
So I know that I'm fairly certain each member agency has had a meeting with Cal Recycle regarding their notice of intent to comply and their action plans that they prepared for those meetings. HWMA is not privy to those meetings. We did sit in with the County of Humboldt at their request, but we were not present at the other member agency meetings. So I could not speak to what has or has not been talked about between the jurisdictions and Cal Recycle regarding compliance.
Okay. Let's see. I want to go ahead and open it up for the public to comment. And I see Robin Prasker has your hand up, and then Evan Edgar.
Hi, everybody. Robin from City of Eureka. I had a few things to cover. I first just wanted to try to address Leslie's question that she just had. Up until this meeting, there hasn't really been from what I understand, a public conversation about where we're truly at and what we thought we were doing with the pre-processing at HWMA. So as far as I understand, CowerCycle doesn't really know about this conversation that's having tonight. So it's hard to answer how they might feel about our possible change in direction or understanding that our financing isn't what we thought it was, and the relocating isn't what we thought it was. So CowerCycle really hasn't had an opportunity to weigh in because this is kind of our first honest public conversation about it. So there is obviously a strategy to how we inform CowerCycle about this that we might want to collaborate on, but that's a whole nother conversation. Anyways, I did want to see if Eric would be willing to share his PowerPoint with the slide with the timeline. It went by really quickly. I had some thoughts on it, but I would need it for reference to be able to properly share my thoughts and questions. Is that possible, Eric?
Eric, I guess maybe as a board member, would you mind sharing that, Eric?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so I really appreciated seeing this laid out. I think it's a good overview of what we have ahead of us if we continue on this trajectory. I do just want to share from a member agency standpoint and an LTF member standpoint. Some of these items we believe had already been occurring the past few months. So in a lot of ways, it kind of feels like it could be considered backtracking, as a few of these items we thought were occurring. We have found out they have not for a wealth of good reasons. And I know everyone's been doing really as hard as they can doing cleanup work from where we've been. But that leads me to pointing out the option C, scheduling a meeting with the LTF to discuss development of a preferred project, commitment levels, funding, and timelines. We have multiple times discussed the preferred project, and it has been pre-processing at HWMA. There has been commitment levels verbally through this whole process. I understand the need to have it in writing, and that's a vital next step. So I just want to share that 2 of those things have already occurred, and funding and timelines we need from HWMA, and they have been unable to, HWMA staff, and they've been unable to provide that yet. And I've been able to share when that might be possible. So personally, I'm kind of feeling like C might be a moot option, as half of them have been accomplished and the other half are up in the air, with member agencies and LTF members unable to share with funding and timelines. So I just want to point that out. I understand this is very nuanced and very complicated. I just really want to try to advocate for staying on track and trying to understand where we've been falling short and not keep repeating the same conversations. So that's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you. Evan Edgar.
Thank you, Evan Edgar, 10,005 N Street, as a resident of Eureka. Yeah, the roadmap has a lot of compliance. It's very relevant and visionary. And had you follow the roadmap, it would have substantial compliance of SB 1383 by 1/1/2024, January 1st, 2024. Throughout the summer, I did float a Gantt chart and a material flow diagram that was provided to the staff that would have showed that by starting by 2024, and maybe even a urban core restaurant phase program with existing trucks. All that was laid out, but wasn't shared with the board. 15 months from now, in order to do that, is plenty of lead time. I see that throughout the state and other jurisdictions to have collection and processing start on 1/1/2024. That is considered substantial compliance. I checked with CowerCycle staff and other jurisdictions. So if you're actually making the substantial compliance, what you're doing by following the roadmap, it would be very relevant to have it starting on that day. What is happening here is Groundhog Day. I'm sure you guys had the same conversation back in 2012 when he had that grant to do the anaerobic digestion about this. I'm sure when Wesley Chesborough passed AB 1826 in 2016, you should have had this conversation. I'm sure when the SB 1383 regulations were adopted in 2020, you should have had this conversation. So this is overdue, but I think it's Groundhog Day. You can continue that on a parallel pathway. It will take 3 to 5 years, and have this great public process is good to go forth. But I think that I never recommended to close the Eureka Recycling Center. Never had. What I said, I was recommending to permit it, and I was going to do it as part of a contract extension, and that could have been within 30 days. So it could have stayed open much longer. I never was behind the closure of the Eureka Recycling Center, but I was willing to permit it at a really effective price. So that is going on. I say test the market. I think those compost facilities out of state for a short term, or out of the county for a very 1 year short term period, would probably be equal to what's going on when you're hauling MSW out of state now. So I think that it's a zero sum game. I think that you'll find it is without a big rate increase, but you have to permit the transfer station and go out to bid. So my recommendation as a resident of Eureka is to follow the roadmap. Otherwise, you'd be driving into a ditch of penalties and fines, because Cal Recycle will not accept not implementing a plan and waiting 3 to 5 years for a regional compost facility. Those are my comments as a resident of Eureka. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Emily Benvey.
Hi, thanks. Emily Benvey, City of Arcata. I won't take too much time reiterating Robin's points. I think that she very eloquently communicated them. And so I just want to add my voice to the choir of Robin's thoughts. And I think I have some potentially separate thoughts from the last public comment that I want to just voice a little bit that might bridge the gap, so to speak, between sort of the notion of permitting a recycling facility or permitting an organics processing facility at a recycling facility in 30 days and being up and running versus the realities of working within the frameworks that we have and the fact that we don't necessarily have that mechanism. And so, in other words, I think that while the intent of continuing to follow the roadmap and continuing to work together is the direction we want to move in, and I would say that we want to move as quickly as possible. And, you know, I use the term we, I mean myself, speaking in the City of Arcata's capacity, as well as in just the team that I've been working on with the staff from all the different municipalities. So my point is, I think that, you know, time is of the essence. And I also want to recognize that there are certain mechanisms and processes that do need to happen before a regional organics processing facility can be up and running. And those mechanisms in part are, you know, understanding that there's a significant financial investment associated with that. And I understand that if HWMA were to undertake that investment, they really would need a commitment from the different member agencies. So I guess what I'm speaking to is just really wanting to find that balance and moving as swiftly and quickly as possible, while also recognizing that things are always more complicated than they seem to be, and knowing that following whatever processes and mechanisms that the board and the LTF come up with will take some time to work through. And I think that we're really well positioned to work through them quickly with the team that we have been building regionally. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Matson.
Yeah, and I need to reiterate what Emily and Robin said, the importance of the first step processing facility. I do realize keeping the recycling center closed while nothing has happened is not a good thing, and it should be reopened until we get something. But we really need to focus on that short-term solution to get a pilot program going with those of us that already have green waste collection, where we can do bags of organic waste in the bins. So I would highly recommend we keep moving forward with that direction. Putting everything out 3 to 5 years. We've already had our action plan meetings with Cal Recycle. They told us in no uncertain terms that the January 2025 truck issue, they don't believe in. They believe that those trucks can be gotten sooner, and they are not going to let us push out that far with our compliance dates. So getting at least something going, even if it is a small processing facility and we're either hauling it out of county or down to the Ferndale dairies while we develop a long-term facility in Humboldt County. I think we need to keep those options on the board. And I would really hope that we wouldn't hold out for a JPA amendment and requiring member agencies or non-member agencies to join to be part of this, the regionalization approach, because I think that will push things further out. And I would hope that we could do something with an MOA and then pull them in later if they so desire. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public who haven't made comment wish to make comment? Okay. Seeing that, I will close public comment.
Chair Castellano, can I make a point of clarification?
Yes, thank you.
So just to clarify, nowhere in any of the staff reports and nowhere in staff's recommendation are they recommending waiting 3 to 5 years to initiate any type of SB 1383 compliance. These recommendations are simply to get the ball rolling to ensure that HWMA board makes commitments, large financial commitments, with guaranteed tonnages to offset those commitments. That is simply what this is spelling out the pathways to ensure those commitments are in hand before a large outfall of money is made by the authority.
Thank you. Which really would be not I mean, by the authority, but by the residents who are paying tip fees and such. So I'm going to bring it back to Steve Madrone's suggestion of taking these kind of one by one because they are kind of big, weighty items. And so let's go back to that now to A. Thank you. So we've had, some questions and some public comment that, and I'm just going to suggest to the board that rather than try to make any sort of motion that encompasses, all 4 of these, that we separate the motions out. I think that might be better for us to kind of weigh in on. But we can kind of, discuss them a little. So back to option A, which is where staff recommends that the board express interest in leading regionalization and secure flow control through the existing joint powers agreement. So we had some questions and comments on that. Do any board members wish to make comment or kind of talk about their thoughts? Well, I'll start and feel free to, put your hand up if you want to add to it. I will just say that I do think that it would be good to, I definitely support sort of Act 1. I think that my opinion is it would be better to then go forward with an MOU of some sort and give ourselves time for the JPA. I do think that could be a long process.
So
Matthews.
So you're saying, Chair Castellano, that we should I'm just going to reiterate, just to make sure I understand correctly, that we'll do step 1, and then while we're kind of waiting for the next step, then we initiate an MOU?
That's what I'm imagining, just because I think that the JPA could take a while. And, it's also, as we all know, it's sort of, it's always politics season, but maybe even more so. And so, I know things tend to take a little bit longer.
So once we have an MOU, can it be like can it be, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Never mind. I'm just trying to process this. So we can have an MOU and then still continue to follow through on steps 2 through 4 while we're waiting back to get these letters of interest. Am I correct?
I see legal counsel Diamond nodding, but
yeah. See, yeah.
It could happen that way. I caution that I'm not sure an MOA is a whole lot faster, because an MOA will require, or an agreement will require the financial commitment that is presently in the joint powers agreement, and the commitment to actually support the rate adjustment to support this. And so that, that conversation has to be had, whether it's in the context of a JPA agreement amendment, a joint powers agreement amendment, or in the context of a memorandum of understanding, memorandum of agreement type of situation. So, that is, I think, going to be the sticky point, is what is the financial commitment of the member agencies. And then that gets to how is that going to be passed on to the ratepayers, and the member agencies have to be committed to, or all of the different agencies have to be willing to commit to not only obtaining the funding from either subsidizing or their ratepayers, and then providing that to the agency.
Yeah, so I don't think that an MOA will save much time then. And somebody else go while I'm getting my thoughts together. I guess the financial conversation, that's a different conversation after we decide which way we want to go, correct? Like what they're...
Eric, please weigh in. I think it's all part of the same conversation. Yeah, go on, Eric.
Yeah, that's correct, Nancy. So the financial assurances are going to really be one and the same. The MOA is going to require, for the life of the contract, member agencies dedicate flow control to HWMA for a 10-year period, or whatever the life of the contract is. The JPA simply allows us to make sure we enforce that, and makes it very clear on stipulations on breach of contract, dissolution of the authority, things of that nature, members of the authority dropping out, and how the responsible financial liabilities go. Whereas an MOA is simply dedicating your flow control. I would also remind the board that we have done MOAs in the past, several occasions, and each one of those MOAs during that time period, a member agency has broken that MOA and sent their tonnage somewhere else than the contracted processor.
Yeah, I think, after hearing that from you, Eric, and from Nancy, I would feel more comfortable going forward with trying to get non-member agencies to join the JPA, amending that, and going forward with that. So basically A in total.
I can support that. I guess I just have some question of, if we're unsuccessful in securing, what would be would that set us back? Would that, what would our kind of recourse be? Would we just be kind of back where we started?
But we could be unsuccessful with the JPA, and we could be just as unsuccessful with an MOA. Is that correct?
Well, an MOA will have to have all of the elements that are in the JPA, or else it just is not enough for this agency to move forward. So it's going to have all of the components of financial responsibility and liability. And in the event of breach, it's going to have all of those remedies, that are currently present for withdrawing from the JPA itself. So it will be we'll just have to port all of those provisions. There's something else I want to point out. Right now, the way the rate collection is structured, the Waste Management Authority adopts the waste management fee. That's the tipping fee at the transfer station. And that is treated by the jurisdictions as a flow-through fee that is tacked on to the charges that are collected by the jurisdiction's franchise hauler. And so that's already built in for solid waste. And if we use the JPA as the vehicle for, charging the waste management fee, which is already part of the JPA, then it becomes part of the flow through, and the franchise agreements won't be as complicated for the individual jurisdictions to amend. If we are doing it through an MOA, the individual jurisdictions are going to have to then also develop that flow through charge in their franchise agreements. Yes, but it may be, I don't know the individual franchise agreements, but it may be a separate conversation that needs to be had.
Okay. So Leslie, we're looking for a motion. I mean, can I make a motion to express interest in leading regionalization and secure flow control through the existing joint powers agreement?
You can make that motion, yes.
Then I will make that motion.
Is there a second?
Excuse me, Director Matthews, can you please just repeat for me what the motion is?
Sure. So I'll make a motion to express interest in leading regionalization and secure flow control through existing joint powers agreement.
Thank you.
Is there a second?
Second.
Director Smith has seconded the motion. Do any other directors wish to make comment? Okay, we'll take it to a vote. Director.
Madam Chair.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Supervisor Madrone. I was just thinking, we have Jill Duffy here this evening with us online. I assume she's been listening to the entire conversation. And as we all know, she comes to us with a tremendous amount of institutional knowledge, having been our executive director for so long. I was just wondering if she would be willing to comment, offer any insights, any direction, any thoughts, because I'm really struggling with this whole process, frankly. So just wondering, don't want to slow things down, but just wondering, Jill, if you might be willing or interested in offering some insights.
Absolutely, if the chair is willing.
Yes, go right ahead.
Certainly. So, first, I just want to express that I'm really sorry that we're having the conversation right now, because this is something that, really should have occurred earlier this year so that you all could have been working with it as Evan was working on the development of the document. So that being said, recognizing where we are today, these are the key questions that really need to be explicitly stated. Number one, I think this is really important that the board go through this process, and I can appreciate some of the frustrations around where we are, feeling a little late. But this is really important. This is like the critical component in order to move forward. As far as the differences between an MOA, the agreement, or a joint powers agreement amendment, excuse me, I'm losing my my buds. I actually support strongly the amendment of a joint powers agreement, because I think it'll actually, amendment, because I think it'll actually be smoother than trying to deal with an MOA or even an agreement. And they're both popping out. Just going to say, these don't stay in as well as people think. So, I think the bigger issue is that if you get a chance to look at the JPA, which is included in the staff report, it gives you a sense of the robustness of the joint powers agreement. And because we're looking at undertaking a project that is going to run anywhere from $1 million to potentially $8 million or more, the flow control and the financial demonstrations are really important. And then, of course, just all of the other aspects of having the member agencies and even the non-member agencies consider joining the authority so that we can continue working forward in a regionalized manner. So I hope that answers your question, Supervisor Madrone.
That was great. So, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Jill.
You're welcome.
Director Wilson, I see you. You're unmuted.
Well, I thought you were getting the question was answered. I thought you were going to.
Okay, I was. I didn't want to cut you off in case you were. Okay. Keep it moving. Sorry, guys. Okay, Director Matthews.
Yes.
Director Hogan's absent. Castellano votes yes. Director Smith.
Aye.
Director Madrone.
Yes.
Director Wilson.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes. Thank you. We will move on to the next section. Okay, so B, we have here reassess previous direction given to staff regarding wine closure and relocation of the Eureka Recycling Center, and 2, repurposing to a processing facility. So that's the staff's recommendation, with a kind of a sub-recommendation to examine reopening the Eureka Recycling Center for purpose of receiving self-hauled source-separated recyclable materials. I have a quick follow-up question to that. I think, because I guess I want to say I'm still interested in moving forward with some sort of transfer type of plan as was in the roadmap. So I'm just curious in terms of like staff time and costs, like, what would be the cost and time to like reopen and then potentially close again in, 6 months or something, or transfer to a compost processing facility at that point. I mean, and kind of relatedly, would reopening delay our permitting for becoming a composting transfer facility?
Yeah, so reopening would be minimal staff time and costs. One item that would need to be brought to the board, obviously, is a timeline and projected costs for that reopening prior to doing that. But one major item would be the current baler. It was on the capital improvement as of last year to replace the belt. The belt is old and aging and well past its useful life. Due to some of the conversations that we had regarding the organics processing, that item was pulled from the CIP and that funding was utilized elsewhere. That is an item that would need to come to the board for allocation. That baler belt would need to be replaced. That is really the only substantial cost to reopening. As I said, we have maintained all staff. We still have all of our bins, traffic cones, traffic flow, the scale house, infrastructure in place. None of that was removed simply because funding for the organics processing infrastructure was not retained. As far as the answer to the timeline, that's obviously not something I could speak to as far as closing the Eureka Recycling Center and then or reopening the Eureka Recycling Center, how long we would have it open and how long we would close it. In theory, that would not affect permitting for the TPR, the transfer processing report. One thing I will note is that in order to amend your transfer and processing report, you have to very specifically outline the activities that are going to take place. So the Eureka Recycling Center, in theory, could be open and we could still file an amendment to the TPR to alter that facility. I will again make note, though, that the facility, before it receives organic material, will need substantial facility improvements and infrastructure improvements. The floor and the doors are both non-operable, so those would have to be fixed, and we would have to spell that activity out in our TPR as well. I can't speak to the total costs of reclosing the Eureka Recycling Center, although it would probably be minimal and most of it would be attributed to education, outreach, and advertising to let people know that it's going to be closed.
Thank you. Director Wilson?
Essentially what B is more or less what Eric just defined, but that would be examine and reopening of the recycling center. We're not actually voting to reopen it. We're authorizing him to generate a cost and tell us what would cost us to do that. Is that correct?
That is correct. We would bring, if the board moves it, we would bring a timeline and potential costs in front of the board in November.
And at this point, unless somebody else has another comment, I would make a motion that we do number 1 of B, examine reopening the recycling center for the purpose of receiving self-hauled, source-operated recyclable materials.
Would you entertain a friendly amendment to also examine the cost for improvements for the TPR?
Yes.
Director Madrone?
While we're waiting for Madrone, I'll second that with the amendment.
Thanks, Director Matthews.
Sorry, I was flapping my lips here. Sorry. Yeah, you got to hit the unmute button. Imagine that. Anyway, what I said was I support the motion and the amendment. And I assume, Eric, that your report back will include sources of funding for the reopening, the closing, and some of the other items we've been talking about that we need to be able to move forward with. So at some point, I'm hoping we can have some updates on where we think we're going to get the money to make all these moves we need to be making over the next year to follow the plan.
That is correct. We will have staff recommendations for not only the activities and potential alterations and changes, but where we are going to acquire the funding for those alterations or changes.
Thank you.
And I apologize, but can I get one more time the name of the director who made the initial motion and also just a recap of what the motion is?
Yeah, it was Director Wilson who made the initial motion. which was item number 1 that's on the screen. And then there was a friendly amendment to add in examine the cost and plan for improvements for the TPR.
Okay, so examine the cost of improvements for the TPR?
Yeah, cost and plan for improvements for the TPR.
Cost and plans for improvements. All right, thank you.
And then Director Matthews was the person who seconded the motion.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And then just so I'm clear, Eric, and then I'll call the vote. You feel like staff has time to kind of do both of these things to kind of keep the compost plan moving forward and address and kind of look at the recycling, re-implementing the recycling.
Yeah, so speaking to item B specifically, I believe staff has the sufficient resources and time. Like has been said several times tonight, there was a lot of legwork that was not only in the report, but done by HWMA staff relating to some of these activities. So we have a little bit of a head start, but I don't believe that there will be any issues, hopefully bringing forward the information that you're looking for at the November meeting.
Okay, thank you. All right, then I'm going to call the vote. Director Matthews?
Yes.
Director Hogan's absent. Castellano's yes. Director Smith?
Aye.
Director Madrone?
Yes.
And Director Wilson?
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. Motion passes unanimously with Director Hogan absent. And then C&D hopefully should be a little easier. So the next one doesn't require, I think it does require a motion, but schedule a joint meeting with the Humboldt County Solid Waste Local Task Force members to discuss development of a preferred project, commitment levels, funding, and timelines. So this seems pretty critical, and it's great to have so many members of the LTF here.
Yeah, that seems like a no-brainer. If that needs a motion, I will so move.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
So the move by Director Matthews, seconded by Director Wilson. Robin, since you are a member of the LTF, although a bit unusual, I will give you the floor for a moment.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I am speaking on behalf of the LTF chair as the alternate with Donna out of the area. I really liked our joint meeting we had. I think it's very strategic. I really just want to emphasize that I really recommend this meeting is not scheduled until we're confident we have new information to share. Again, I feel like we've been having some repeated conversations for good reasons, but I really would like that meeting to not be scheduled until we're sure that we've got updates and tangible information for us to talk about. I don't want to meet for the sake of meeting. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm just trying to quell my snarky comment about meeting for the sake of meeting. But anyway, though I appreciate the comments. I'm okay with not scheduling the meeting tonight. And I don't think that's implied in the motion. Does staff feel comfortable scheduling that meeting and working with the LTF and the board to schedule that meeting?
If that's the board's direction, staff can do that.
Okay, I think we can do that. Any other comments from the board? Okay, Director Matthews?
Yes.
Director Hogan is absent. Castellano votes yes. Director Smith?
Aye.
Director Madrone?
Yes.
And Director Wilson?
Yes.
Great. And I know item number, the letter D was other direction as appropriate. I know some of that was included in the motion that went along with B. Is there any other direction that board members wish to introduce at this time? Director Madrone.
Yeah, I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank Eric for his stepping up to this role. Amazing effort. Thank you, Eric. And please let all of the staff know how grateful we are for all the hard work that everybody's doing and all the kind of ups and downs and back and forth. Thank you for staying on the roller coaster with us. We very much appreciate it. Without you and the staff, we'd be in a world of hurt. So thank you for your yeoman effort here. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Madrone. I will pass that along to staff.
Thank you. So is there anything, yeah, and for sure, definitely, I think we all just appreciate your willingness to take us through a difficult process. And we're here with you. So let's see. And is there any other direction at this time for Eric and staff at HWMA? I don't see anyone bringing anything up. Eric, do you feel like you need direction in anything that has been brought up tonight?
No, I believe staff has received sufficient direction for several of the items. And thank you, Chair.
For sure. Thank you. Okay. With that, we will move on to item number 8. And thanks to all the members of the LTF who are here and kind of staying on course through this process as well, which is just standing item recycling update. Is there anything you want to add in tonight, Eric?
No, for the sake of brevity, I do not have an update.
Okay, thank you. And item 9 is board member reports. Do any members of the board wish to report tonight? Seeing none, I will close item number 9 and move on to item 10, the executive director's report. I'll turn it back over to you, Interim Director Eric Keller-Beckman.
Again, nothing to report at this time.
Okay. And with that, we will move on. We will close item number 10 and move on to adjourning this meeting. Thank you, everyone, for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, everyone. That was
Thank
great.
you, Captain.
Appreciate your time.
Yep. Good night.